I'm with Eversource. I'm in their legal department. For those who are new and maybe signing on today to hear about some wonderful stuff going on in the renewables world, um, this is edition number 15, maybe, of our virtual tour. We will still be going virtual through the fall. I'm not sure. Maybe it's the holiday party. Marcia, with the first time we'll be in person.
That sounds about right.
Yep. Reminder, there is no meeting in August. Our next meeting is in September 17th, I believe.
That's correct.
And it's on 3I, which is, for those who are in the water world, is an exciting area, water permitting. Today, on behalf of Eversource, I'm just glad we're going to hear something about Eversource besides rates and storm response. So I'm very excited to hear what those two speakers, as well as speakers in the solar and fuel cell industry, and share their insights with us about what's going on in the renewables world, which is the world we're all headed, and we're all headed to in a much greater capacity in the years ahead. That's about it for me today. Obviously, it's a warm day out there, so stay safe, and don't worry, more rain will come tomorrow for those who want that. That's it. I'm going to turn it over to John to introduce our panel and go from there.
Chuck, thank you, Chuck. Thank you for the introductions, as always. And yeah, welcome to our E2 monthly meeting. And the focus, as Chuck said, is going to be on renewables. So we're fortunate to have a number of guest speakers. So we have 4 different guest speakers, starting with Steve Berndorf, who's Director of Renewable Energy and Consulting, works closely with our Tom Guerra here at CBIA for some of our energy solution and products. We also have Frank Wolak, from a Senior Vice President, Government Affairs and Marketing Development from Fuel Cell Energy right here in the state of Connecticut. And then we have Elizabeth Donohue, a old friend and colleague for many, many years of mine, wonderful person and very smart. Government Relations for Offshore Wind for Eversource. Looking forward to hearing that presentation. And then we have Roger Cronenberg, Vice President of Energy Strategy and Policy for Eversource. It's going to kind of give an overview. And yes, we're happy to grant you guys the opportunity to talk about something other than rates. Truly look forward to hearing what you have to say about the renewable energy space and continue to educate us on where we're headed. For that, I'll turn it back to Marcy, or who can, I think, set up Steve for the first set of slides.
You're all set.
Okay, wonderful. Can you all hear me? Okay, wonderful. Thanks, John, Marcy, Tom, everyone, for having me here. It's really nice to join the meeting this morning. I'm Steve Berndorf, Director of Renewable Consulting for USource. We're an independent advisory firm that's worked very closely with CBIA. Well, Tom knows the history better than I for quite some time now. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to comment. Actually, fuel cell energy, that's not me.
Hey, Steve, you're free to do my presentation if you want. I'm good with
that. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate it. I think you do it a little better than I might. This looks more familiar. Anyway, so I just wanted to say very quickly, I know we have a lot of policy folks on the phone, rates, regulations, etc. I should point out that my background is that of a solar developer. So I've been real nuts and bolts on the ground, developing, selling, financing, advising for the last 15 years for commercial and industrial customers, primarily municipal, typically behind the meter, what we call DG, distributed generation. So my perspective is perhaps a little bit different, a little bit more kind of tactical. And so I encourage you to ask questions, right? I've dealt with customers who are interested in, what is solar? How does it work? What are the economics? How does it work for me? What's the practical implication of actually installing solar relative to the regulatory framework that exists that some of these other folks might more commonly comment on? So please do ask questions. I know also it's a very quick, we've got about 15 minutes, probably about 12 minutes now. And so I'll move quickly, but I do encourage, if you have questions or like to talk afterwards, I've been doing this for a long time and really enjoy speaking about it. Next slide, please. And so very quickly, who am I? Who is USource? And maybe Tom, if you'd like very quickly to just to mention the CBIA USource relationship. And if Tom's not available, I know we've been working with CBIA.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Sure, Steve.
go for it.
I am having some audio issues. It seems like everybody's breaking up here, and I don't know if that's just on my end, but yeah, CBIA and USource have had a very great partnership for 20 years. We view USource as our supplier management partner. We work together on every deal, and USource Connecticut channel partner. Recently, USource has expanded its services after being purchased by Nextera. So they're really ramping up everything they can do. And recently, what was it, about a little over a year ago, brought Steve on board to be really the solar guru. And Steve and I have worked with CBI members on a number of engagements so far. And when John Blair and Marcy asked me, who's the solar guy we want on this call, I said it's Steve. So
thank you.
Big shoes to fill there, Steve.
Thanks very much. And just building on that, yes, we're an independent advisory firm. We've been doing energy advisory, brokerage, commodity for the last 20 years, working with CBIA very closely. We were acquired by NextEra Energy Solution, Fortune 200, $150 billion balance sheet, which gives us a lot of access to resources, but we remain 100% independent. We are not selling products. We are advisory, completely independent. Next slide, please. So I won't go too much into detail, but how does solar energy work? Effectively, of silicon panels, the sun hits them, converts the light energy into DC energy. Electrons are created. It's direct current. You can't use that as a business. The DC flows down to inverter, which converts it to AC, alternating current. You can then use it locally at your facility, or it is exported to the grid. That's in the most simple terms how solar energy works. There's other solar programs, but behind the meter distributed generation, this is generally panels on your roof, on your lawn, carports, converts energy, inverted to AC. You either use it or you export it. And then the financial benefits flow from that conversion based on production, your prevailing utility rate, etc. Next slide, please. And many types of solar arrays, as I mentioned, they can be on your roof. You typically don't see those, but they're up there. You've probably seen some in landfills, not so much in Connecticut, but maybe if you've driven through New York, by the side of the road, big solar farms. Carports, that might be a solution for some of the CBI members, actually steel engineered structures, even photovoltaics. We're starting to see solar developed on, ponds, retention ponds, offshore, things like that. A lot of different options there. Next slide, please. So let's start getting into sort of why solar for business. Sustainability, I'm sure you're all hearing about it. It's becoming table stakes, really. It's built into a lot of sustainability reports. Customers are asking about it. Employees are asking about it. It really is becoming table stakes. If you're not doing something, as was alluded to on this introduction here, we're starting to see it more, and you're starting to be a little bit behind the curve, quite frankly. Solar in particular is safe, well understood. It's reliable. It's been around for 50 years. Commercially, it's on the space station, right? No moving parts. It just works. And interestingly, this graph here on the right, what it's showing is that the thick blue bands is actually the solar adoption, right? It's this very steep curve, and it's actually driven by that thin blue line, which is actually a cost curve. The cost of solar has decreased probably 90% in the last 10 years. When I started in solar development in 2008, the cost of a panel was $4 a watt. Don't worry about the units, it's just a relative comparison. $4 a watt. Today, that same panel, which is marginally more efficient, 30 cents a watt. I mean, we have seen just a precipitous decline in price. And the net result is really it's a significant economic benefit for businesses, largely driven again by your prevailing utility rates and production. But people like solar. It's long-term control over energy spend, budget predictability. CFOs like it. And it really does demonstrate your organization's commitment to sustainability. There are panels on the roof, out in front. Employees, customers see it, and it's a very tangible representation of a commitment to sustainability and financial savvy as well, I believe. Next slide, please. So getting down to kind of brass tacks, how do you pay for a solar system? And it's really one of the first questions I ask when I'm advising anybody on solar, because it's a big piece of it. And there's really two ways to do it. You can pay cash, do some sort of financed debt product where you actually own the system, or you can do a third-party owned system, kind of a lease, or what we call it in the industry, a PPA, power purchase agreement. And just very quickly, a PPA, no capital expenditure, somebody else pays for it. Third party takes all the tax benefit, and there is a lot of tax benefit to solar. It's roughly half the cost, some in the form of ITC, investment tax credit, some in the form of accelerated depreciation, actually 100% bonus depreciation. With a PPA, there's no O&M, there's no ownership risk. Somebody else does everything. They own, operate, maintain, insure. And there are buyout provisions. So after the tax period, called the recapture period, is over, typically 6 years, you can buy the system at a vastly discounted rate because the tax investor has already taken those benefits. Some of the cons: long-term contract, it's a take or pay structure. You're paying for every one of those kilowatt hours at the agreed upon price. Sometimes that's a good price, sometimes it's not a good price. So there is some economic risk relative to the utility pricing. And generally, there's less savings over time. The financier tends to take a lot of that value. And, given many of the businesses of this membership were relative to what I've seen, PPAs may not be available. They may not be economically viable. I'm a big proponent of owning systems, of cash systems. Cash system, the owner gets all the tax benefits. You get all the value. You get the renewable energy credits, you get the tax credits, you get everything. The long-term cash flows, very significant. And projects typically can cash flow, meaning they make financial sense. Some of it depends on how you define that and what's your sort of financial requirement for, say, simple payback or IRR or NPV. But all those can be calculated with a pretty high degree of certainty. There is some O&M, but it's very manageable. Again, solar, it just works. The cons: require some upfront capital, does require some operational attention, and this is the biggest piece of it: the EPC, the installer selection. Critical. You need to know who you're working with, if they're qualified, competent, and you got to make sure that you're kind of keeping your eye on them. Most folks are great, but if you ask the right questions up front, you're going to save yourself a lot of headaches and money over time. And in the close to 15 years that I've been developing and selling systems, I have never once sold a system that didn't make economic sense, where the CFO didn't look at the number on the bottom right of that pro forma. Is it red or is it black? And how big is it? It's just a fact. So it does make financial sense. All right, next slide, please. This is an indicative pro forma. So if you're thinking about solar, be it a cash purchase, be it a PPA, you're going to want to put together some sort of pro forma. A developer will typically give you one. You want to kind of gut check that to make sure that you believe those numbers. And frankly, as an advisor, and as a developer too, I don't really care what the numbers are. What I care about is the sensitivity. I want to know what the inputs are, and I want to test them. Conservative case, aggressive case, is it reasonable, believable, etc. The good news is, in Connecticut, generally speaking, for a sort of garden variety solar installation, it's about a 4 to 6 year payback with about a 15% IRR, which is good. A 15% hurdle rate, I mean, that's pretty darn good. And that's, again, stable, steady, year-over-year cash flows. Connecticut's got, it's not the most solar-friendly state, or it doesn't have the most robust renewable policy, but there are what they call ZRECs, which are renewable energy credits, and they have value. You can actually sell them into the marketplace to meet state goals, and that really juices the returns. And I'm going to pause. I know we're tight on time, and I want to be very sensitive to that. So I'm actually going to pause here and first ask if there are any questions, of course. And if there's more time, I'd be happy to kind of dig deeper. But I do want to be respectful of the schedule and the other speakers as well. So let me pause there real quick. Tom, Marcy, how we doing on time, or questions that the attendees may have?
I don't hear any questions, Steve, but
Okay.
you may want to wrap it up. We are kind of up against our time slot here, so but we really appreciate you presenting to us.
Okay, very good. Next slide, and really just
This is
yeah, go ahead. Do we have a question?
yes.
Having a little bit of an audio issue. I can't hear.
Why
There we go.
are so many people so hesitant to do solar?
Wonderful question. And I asked, again, I've been selling solar, developing it for 15 years, now in a totally advisory capacity. So many reasons why. It's just unknown. I mean, most importantly, everybody's got a day job, right? You're running a business, you're doing other things. You're doing stuff you really know about. And everybody on this call, most people who consider solar are very smart people. Solar is not rocket science, but it's just nuanced. Solar is so complex in the whole value chain as you think about developing a project, regulatory concern, how much does it cost installing it, permits, interconnection, EPC construction milestones. I mean, it is just as a whole a bear. And again, not rocket science. In fact, it's really just a construction project. Remodeling your kitchen may be more difficult. But if I were to ask you something like, how much does solar cost? What should it cost? How much should the panels produce? Very fundamental drivers of the economic returns of a solar system. My guess is very few people could answer that question. And so really, as an advisor, that's why I think it's important to have an advisor, because it's just nuanced, right? You want somebody there kind of holding your hand on your side of the table. And I don't say that as a sales pitch, right? If it's not me or Tom or CBIA as a partner, it's anyone. Get somebody who knows how to do it, because it's going to save you time, energy, and money in the long term and the short term. But it's a great question, right? I'm always, just bamboozled, perplexed. Like, why doesn't everybody have solar? It's a great use of capital, 15% IRR. Show me somewhere where you can get a return like that over 20 years with very low worry. And I say, go do it. So we can have that conversation all day long. It's a wonderful question. And, I appreciate that perspective. Anyway, I won't go into this because of time, but just, everything that's on this slide here, I would say, give a call anytime, or Tom, and we'd love to talk about your project. I'm always happy to help, just as a friendly ear. And, really, it's been an honor. I appreciate the time, and Tom, thanks, Marcy, for inviting me to do this. It's really my pleasure, and thank you very much. Any other questions, feel free to ask or email me at some other time, but thank you very much.
Are there any other questions for Steve? If not, Steve, thank you so much for your time today. We love hearing your deep analysis on solar and your great knowledge with regards to that sector of the industry. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to Frank Wolak, who's going to go ahead and give us an update from the fuel cell perspective. And thank you for being with us today. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Good. John, Marcy, thank you very much. And it's interesting to be on a panel where you happen to know the other participants. It's rare that you're not the isolated one person. And Liz and Roger, good to hear your voices. What I'm going to do here in the next about 15 minutes or so or shorter is to give you a bit of a snapshot of some of the things we're up to in Connecticut and a bit of the storyboard about our own company's evolution into new markets. And with that, when we go to the next slide here, Marcy. We've been known around Connecticut for a number of years as a player in the energy space, certainly around the Northeast, with core roots in research and development, 300 people involved in the manufacture and development of fuel cell and electrochemical technologies here in Connecticut. We've had market success around the globe with over 250 megawatts of our plants operating, and more than 50 global projects and a number of partners. What unknown to many of you is that our core roots are electrochemistry, and while we've been a provider of stationary fuel cell power generation technology within Connecticut, we have also been at the cutting edge of developing electrochemical technologies that are forward-looking into the world of hydrogen, and that's kind of the launch point of how I see this brief presentation. Next, Marcy. The next two slides really give a sense of the outward look of how we see our world, and I think it is the way many people on this phone call or this WebEx see the world. We've got shifting discussions about where we're going to get our energy resources. We've got questions about power stability. We've got evolving regulatory mandates to do certain things, both nationally and with Connecticut. We have a concern about supply chain and the ability to get power and get resources, certainly in our COVID world, but even beyond that. These are the things we worry about every day. Next, Marcy. Similarly, we have external activities going on, cyber attacks on pipeline systems, and as we are all aware, state and local sustainability objectives. The IRP in Connecticut launched sort of a new direction. Storage mandates, the evolution of the wind offshore that's come up very quickly. And I think Liz and may touch on that later. And then we also see some very interesting anomalies that bear on our technologies. While we are looking at all of us looking at the way to decarbonize, we also see a strange anomaly of carbon dioxide shortages in food and beverage and areas where we really need CO2. And so all of these come together in our mindset and the way we look at our own technologies and platforms. Next one. And here's kind of a chart I'll dwell on for a moment, because we, as a technology development company, fuel cell technology development company, we address those issues that I pointed out earlier, not from a consulting standpoint or from a utility standpoint or from a big energy developer, but really from a technology developer. How can our skill sets in manufacturing, research, deployment of technologies continue to expand to meet those needs? And this chart really gives a bit of a snapshot of at the bottom, what we're known mostly for is our distributed generation platforms. Quiet, negligible criteria pollutants, easy to cite. You can put them in a variety of places. And that's what we've really been known for most of the time within fuel cell energy. But when you go up the spectrum here, unbeknownst to many people, we have a capability within our technology to actually separate carbon, CO2, and further capture it. Those are maybe a bit more long-ranged in terms of the true carbon capture. We have some exciting things going on with ExxonMobil, but it shows that this platform of technologies built here in Connecticut has a place in the evolution of the energy transition. As I migrate up to the top, we also have technologies that fit very well into all the work that others are doing in the form of hydrogen energy storage and distributed hydrogen. I'll touch on those in a moment, but I think that for this panel, CBIA, we're all in a world of Connecticut businesses trying to participate in this evolving energy transition. There may not have been visibility of the spectrum of things that we are doing at Fuel Cell Energy and how we're going to continue to participate very aggressively. Next slide. These next couple of slides give you a sense of more traditional what we've been up to in Connecticut recently. We are executing on some long-term contracts that we have. These are 3 snapshots. Starting at the upper right is a rendering. This is on Homestead Avenue in Hartford of a reused industrial brownfield area where we will be deploying a 7.5 megawatt fuel cell system. We think it's going to be a market improvement to what is there today, and a complement to both the city of Hartford, but also to the goals of the state to look at ways in which industrial brownfields can be reused and repurposed, especially in core urban areas. The second slide is the plant that's under construction at the U.S. Navy, Groton. It's a 7.5 megawatt facility that will be part of the Navy's microgrid, again, tying our core technologies, baseload fuel cell power, into other needs. And this will be a key element in sustaining the activities of the base and delivering power to CMEC. Lastly, at the bottom is a sort of a sister plant to the Homestead. It's about 14 megawatts on the Naugatuck River in Derby. And this is also on a remediated industrial site. It's an industrial brownfield where we are really repurposing a section of area that would put a power plant in place, delivering power to the UI grid down there, and also reusing a rather dormant industrial property and repurposing it in Derby. So we're pretty proud of what's going on right now. This gives a bit of a snapshot of some of the things that we will be putting more visibility in the next coming months. Next slide, Marcy. Kind of expanding that theme of resilient distributed generation and industrial brownfield reuse. Just recently, the state had, the governor had signed Public Act 21-162, which is an improved version of a bill that requires the EDCs to acquire new fuel cell technology and generation. There's some details here that I won't spend much time on, but there's a lot of preference for what I just described earlier. Obviously, fuel cells manufactured in Connecticut, sited on brownfields and landfills, and we think this is an opportunity to connect with Eversource and UI, and Roger will be certainly reaching out within your organization to chat about the ways in which these fuel cell systems can be deployed to enhance your own grid, build resiliency in pockets that might otherwise be unattended, and maximize the use of this law in a way that the legislature intended. So that news to follow, but we think this is another exciting time of inserting fuel cell technologies into the framework and fabric of what's going on in Connecticut. Next one, Marcy. When I mentioned, this is a bit of a technology discussion. When I mentioned what we do in these technologies, this gives a snapshot of the suite of technologies. The left-hand side are our traditional power plants that we put together: 1 megawatt, the 2 megawatts, 4 megawatts, 7 megawatts. An adaptation of that, which I'll touch on earlier, is the ability for our fuel cells to also separate hydrogen, and we call it our Trigen platform. And I'll be telling you about something going on in California right now that allows the traditional fuel cell that has been resident within California to have an additional purpose. As I move further to the right, that same carbonate technology can simply be used in a reverse form to generate hydrogen from a fuel. We call it our REP technology, but you can essentially take a biogas or natural gas and generate distributed hydrogen where needed with a platform of fuel cell technology that was homegrown here in Connecticut. As I move further along, I'll touch on these because they get into the future a bit. That along with our carbonate technology to the left, we are advancing some solid oxide fuel cell technologies that take the form of traditional distributed generation, but also have some really exciting attributes about the ability to generate hydrogen and also, in a reversible mode, store hydrogen for long duration energy storage. And we think that provides a very interesting complement to the kinds of renewable development that's going on around the country and certainly here in New England. Next slide, Marcy. This is a snapshot of what I mentioned about the trigeneration. The next two slides are going to be a bit about some of the advanced technologies. But this particular facility is under construction right now. It was designed around a need for Toyota to have a 100% renewable facility at its port operations where cars come into the California West Coast. and also generate a source of local hydrogen to fuel the hydrogen vehicles that they will be bringing in. All their hydrogen vehicles, the Toyota Mirai and their future truck products, come into the United States empty, and they wanted to make sure that they had their own resident supply of hydrogen as California begins to build out hydrogen infrastructure for refueling. So we worked with them to craft a project that will take renewable biofuel, put it through our tri-generation platform, generate about 2.5 megawatts of power for delivery to the grid, and provide to Toyota about 1.2 tons of hydrogen a day. And you can see on this chart, enough to drive nearly 1,500 vehicles. And strangely enough, this technology also generates water. And if anybody's been watching California, that's kind of a precious commodity. But they're actually going to wash the cars with the reverse osmosis byproduct water that would otherwise be released into the atmosphere. So we look at this as its own somewhat of an interesting ecosystem. We also would like to throw this out that these are the kinds of platforms that we think could play a role in other parts of the country. And you know, maybe even Roger, you and I can discuss how this fits into some of the 30 megawatts of what Connecticut might be deploying as part of the legislation I just mentioned. That's for a separate discussion. So some exciting things going on with traditional platforms as we look at the future of how hydrogen fits into our framework. Next slide, Marcy. This, I think, is my last slide here as I approach my 9-10 window of ending. This is a very simplistic slide, but it embodies the core of our solid oxide energy electrolysis system, which would take electricity and at very high efficiencies convert it to hydrogen. Now, if you couple that with storage, you also have the ability to have a long duration storage system that rivals, we believe, the cost structure of batteries. In some ways, it looks like a pumped hydro. You've got the ability to take varying renewable load, put it into storage, and as long as you have additional tankage, you can make 8, 16-hour duration or even longer storage with variable cycles that we think is an interesting complement to the way we will be seeing variable wind and solar resources inserted into the ISO here in New England and certainly in Connecticut. So it's sort of an exciting time to be looking at the transition of our own technologies, our place in Connecticut and New England, and some of the complements that we will be bringing to the other participants on this call. And I think that just about wraps me up, Marcy. I think the last slide. Oh, actually, let me just kind of go one more. I'm repeating this slide in a way as a summary because, as I mentioned, we are fundamentally have been involved in distributed generation, but given what I described, we see a very healthy place for our technologies to play a role in the world that other companies are working on, and you know, have a number of outreach with large energy players very interested in the top of that curve or top of that chart. So more to follow. Look forward to more exciting times in Connecticut with CBIA and all the panelists. And I think, Marcy, that puts me right at 9:10. Happy to take questions.
Any questions? All right, well, thank you so much, Frank. And next up, we're going to have Elizabeth Donohue from Eversource.
Good morning. Thank you for the
Yeah, I think you're on
opportunity.
mute.
Can you hear me now? Good, great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. And Frank, it's nice to see you too. And John, of course, as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about Eversource's offshore wind interests and to give an overview of the industry this morning. I hope it will be informative. Next slide, please. So Ørsted is our 50-50 partner in a joint venture to develop offshore wind in the Northeast. We own a lease area off of Martha's Vineyard and the coast of New England. Ørsted is the global leader in offshore wind development. They were the first ones to build a wind farm. They are the first ones to decommission a wind farm, and they are global. So we're very lucky to be in partnership with them. And as you know, besides Eversource being your local utility, we are also a catalyst for clean energy in the Northeast, and we are working on a number of technologies that Roger will get into as we move things forward for a cleaner future. Next slide, please. So we believe the future is offshore wind. This is completely compatible with fuel cell and solar. We need all three in order to move to a cleaner energy future, and they each complement each other. So the US East Coast in particular is known for its strong winds, its shallow water depths, and it's close to population centers, which meant we can deliver that power directly where it's needed. Right now, there are 13 states that are working on offshore wind projects, and that capacity is growing annually right now. And the industry is now really developing in the United States. So the first installation vessel for offshore wind is being built in Brownsville, Texas, with steel from West Virginia, and its first port of call will be New London, Connecticut. So this is and it will have a U.S. Crew and team. So this is a real shift from what's been a European-dominated market to really develop a U.S. industry, and it's very exciting. And of course, the Biden administration, we're hearing a lot of talk about this week. In fact, it has a strong commitment to green energy and is really pushing offshore wind. In fact, in the last 6 months, we've had a number of permitting hurdles overcome, and more projects are on their way to being developed, thanks to renewed interest from the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate the point of why offshore wind is valuable and why the East Coast is the best place for it, we have huge electricity demand. We have great winds, as you can see in the middle slide. In fact, New England is considered the best place for offshore wind, or with the most consistent offshore wind speeds in the world. And then they get less great as you go down, but they're still pretty great as you move down the mid-Atlantic and into the south. And then we have a large buildable continental shelf. So there's a lot of space out there to put up these large turbines. Next slide, please. So to the point around compatibility and how complementary offshore wind is, offshore wind is most productive in the winter, which is exactly what New England needs. Recently, we've become very dependent on oil and gas. And if you think back to the polar vortex of 2017 and 2018, we paid an additional $700 million in wholesale electricity costs in Connecticut, which led to 1 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions being in the atmosphere, right? Offshore wind provides an affordable, consistent energy source that is clean. So the opposite of what we've been depending on. So that provides a real opportunity for the region with offshore wind to address this problem that we have in the winter. Next slide, please. This slide chart shows the global growth that we've had in offshore wind over the last 2 decades. We've gone from no turbine spinning to over 5,000 spinning. And you can see as technology has advanced in the last 5 or so years, they've gone up considerably. How many are out there in the ocean? So just in 2019 alone, 3.6 gigawatts of turbines were installed. So big changes are coming, and they're coming quite quickly. And Connecticut is lucky to be right at the forefront of it. Next slide, please. So as an example of the rapid changes in the technology, this shows the advancement in wind turbines in terms of their size. The turbine in the middle here, the fourth one from the left, that is what's in Block Island. Those are considered old technology now. So they went in not that long ago, all 5 of the demonstration project off Block Island. If you've seen them, they're pretty extraordinary. We're talking about this size turbine now. So about the size of the Chrysler building, that's what that's what the future holds for offshore wind turbines, which is a good thing in that it creates more energy more efficiently, and it means less turbines in the water ultimately. So we can get the same amount of energy from fewer resources. Again, that helps bring down the cost. Just for greater perspective, if you look over here, you'll see the size of a Boeing 747, so it really puts it in perspective how large the turbines are. Next slide, please. And offshore wind has become affordable. Just as was noted about solar, the price for offshore wind has come down considerably. When we first started talking about Cape Wind about more than a decade ago, it was $200 per megawatt hour, and we've now seen a 60% drop as we're looking at the Park City Wind project for Connecticut, which signed a PPA for $80 per megawatt hour. So it's big changes on that front. But the other piece is, because this is new and clean, as oil and older fossil fuel power plants come offline and prove that they are not economical any longer, offshore wind is the answer to that. So they are the preferred and more affordable generation choice as we move forward in comparison to coal and nuclear and oil plants. So it's promising. And next slide, please. And states have taken notice of this. They are looking to meet their ambitious clean energy goals with offshore wind. In only 4 years, offshore wind has become the fastest growing source of clean energy in the United States. 7 states along the Northeast and in the Mid-Atlantic have procurements in place, and we are working towards a goal of more than 31 of 30 gigawatts by 2030. So there's a real push here to keep things moving. With regard to the current playing field around RFPs and what's out there, New York, if you notice on the slide, offshore wind, they have procured about 4,000, including one of our projects, Sunrise Wind, which I'll talk a little bit about. New Jersey just awarded an additional about 2,200 megawatts just last week. So they're the next big mover. Massachusetts has an RFP on the street right now that will bids should be due in September for their next ask, which is for 1,200 megawatts or up to 1,200 megawatts. Rhode Island is expected to go to bid sometime this year. They were expected to go to bid in February, and then their change in gubernatorial leadership, I think, has pushed it off a bit, but that's expected to move at around 600 megawatts. Maryland has a new RFP out on the street as well. Virginia has 5,000 procured. Those are rate-based. It was done by legislation in Virginia. So that project is also moving ahead. I think they just received their NOI as well. Connecticut does not have, is not planning to do an RFP until maybe 2022. Is an early mover and has 300 or so megawatts under contract with the Revolution Wind project, which I will talk about. They are not, in part because of the deal with Millstone, there is not a rush to go out and procure more, but it would be great if they did, and sooner. And there's a really nice synergy between Rhode Island and Connecticut and where interconnection points are in order to bring that power onshore and to really think of those states as, working in tandem together. And that would also help drive the price down further for both. Next slide, please. Oh, I should say one more thing. Just in the late December or so, the Biden administration plans to go out for another round of bids for lease areas off the New York Bight, which would be just south of Long Island and right outside of New York Harbor. And so there's a lot more activity and more developers are coming to the table over that as well, because that demand is not going to let up anytime soon. So that's there. So Eversource and Ørsted, as I mentioned, are in a 50-50 partnership to develop offshore wind in the Northeast. They formed this in December of 2016. We have about 4,000 megawatts of offshore wind available for development and currently have 3 projects in development under contract. Revolution Wind, which will serve Rhode Island and Connecticut, South Fork, which is a smaller project serving the Hamptons and the north end of Long Island, and Sunrise Wind, which is a large project, won in the first round of NYSERDA's procurements. Next slide, please. So Revolution Wind is 704 megawatts of clean, reliable, renewable energy. It will serve more than 350,000 homes across the 2 states. It's located 32 miles southeast of Connecticut. You cannot see it from Connecticut, and about 12 miles southwest of Martha's Vineyard. It will have up to 100 turbines, and it will be assembled out of New London, which is really a big deal. We'll talk more about the investment in New London coming up. Next slide, please. So offshore wind brings a lot of benefits to Connecticut and the Northeast. Besides reducing carbon emissions and providing us with greater clean air, it's a more sustainable future. Across all of our projects, we will be able to provide power to more than 900,000 homes. And it's also creating new jobs, right? As we're building this new industry here, we're creating new pathways for folks. And embedded in our commitments to Connecticut and all the states we work in is a degree of workforce development. And we're working with partners and research institutions as well to keep driving this industry forward. So there's a economic growth element to this, and we're working to create an industry epicenter, particularly around New London. Hopefully there will be one in Providence as well, as they are close to the lease areas. And so we're putting dollars into workforce efforts in both of those places in particular. And you may have heard also, we have a couple of local partnerships in Connecticut that were recently announced, one with Mystic Aquarium, one with the Children's Museum of Niantic, and one with Project Oceanology, all of which are to create sort of pipelines into the career paths for offshore wind. Mystic Aquarium is also going to do some tracking, marine mammal tracking and studies for us as well, so that we can maintain our, be environmentally conscious as we build out in the ocean. I'll keep moving. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of a project soup to nuts, if you will. This is the onshore portion on the right-hand side and the offshore on the left-hand side. There is many elements to this. It's very complex, but beginning with production, then assembly and deployment. So assembly is important to Connecticut because that will be happening out of State Pier in New London once that pier is redeveloped. And then deployment, we talk about these large installation vessels, which are will be a sight to be seen, but they will be working year-round to install these turbines. And the jackup vessel that was installation vessel that is being built out of Texas will serve a number of projects, initially with the Revolution Wind project and then moving on to others. Next slide, please. So we want to harness the strategic value of State Pier in New London. State Pier offers several advantages. It is close proximity to our lease areas. It has direct access to the ocean without any overhead obstructions. It is in a deep water port, and we have a strong blue technology supply chain already, ideally suited for wind and a specialized and skilled workforce. So next slide. So we're working hard to make that, to tie that in. And this will not just serve Eversource and Ørsted's projects. The intent is to redevelop the port to serve the whole region ultimately. As we build this next maritime industry, you get a sense of what it will look like with towers. You can see the I-95 in the background there, of what it will look like at State Pier when we're doing an installation. So it's going to expand the footprint of State Pier by about 8 acres to allow for the laydown area needed for wind turbine delivery. We're going to have a heavy lift cargo capacity, which is not currently at State Pier, which will serve all industries, not just offshore wind. And then we have a long-term lease on the facility with Gateway, which I'm sure you've spoken with in the past, to place to make sure that we're maximizing the facility as best we can. Ørsted and Eversource are putting in more than $100 million to support this infrastructure. Next slide. Yep, and that's it. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and we're really excited to be a part of this effort. I hope I covered a whole bunch of areas, so I'm happy to answer questions and go a little bit deeper if needed.
Hi, Liz. This is Frank. I don't have a question, but I have an observation and an offer. Your slide 13 that showed that complete spectrum of supply chain sort of stopped at the substation. And I think there's a very valid place for insertion of some storage technologies down at that side of your slide, and would be happy to talk to all of you about that.
Well, thank you. I think we're just starting to really delve into that at this point. And I think we'll see more storage requirements come up in coming procurements in particular. I think New York is starting to look more in that direction as well. It certainly has an impact as we do, we find where our landfalls are going to be and what the interconnection points are, and that makes those even more important.
Hey, Liz, this is Chuck Nicole. How is Connecticut compared to the other states and how they're handling the wind, offshore wind, whether it's through procurement, whether regulatory climate, et cetera? And one thing I know, if you could just talk a little bit about in Massachusetts, they have a little different criteria for new projects going forward. They have to be cheaper than anything that's already been permitted. I don't know if that exists in any of the other states, but if you want to talk about Connecticut versus the rest of New England.
Yep. So Massachusetts has a requirement that any new project that they choose has to be cheaper than the last one they chose, which is challenging in part because you don't really know what the last number was because it depends on tax credits and all these other pieces. But Massachusetts has always, in its two procurements, it's always gone with the cheapest, not with the one that's going to provide the most economic development, which has caused a lot of debate in Massachusetts. The folks on the South Coast want more economic development and commitments to the area, but if you want cheap, then that doesn't necessarily follow. Connecticut does not have a requirement for it to be it does not follow the Massachusetts model, but in practice, Connecticut has followed that and is always looking for the least expensive energy, regardless of economic development. So our initial project actually came in two pieces. We have 300 megawatts, but it was part of the two initial procurements in Connecticut, and they were small, so 200 and 100, and they tagged off of the Rhode Island procurements in particular. So that kind of kept the price down, and there was some economic development around that. Our investment in New London is built on an initial investment there, but is much bigger and is completely outside of our PPA, right? I mean, a $100 million commitment to New London is in no way logical compared to the 300 megawatts that we have under PPA. It is just purely because New London is the right place. New York is absolutely looking for economic development, and they're looking for cheap, and they want both at the same time, and they demand that in their procurements. They want to see, a blade factory, a turbine factory. They are looking for to really build that industry, particularly in Albany and Suffolk County and Brooklyn. So that's their goal. They're very heavy-handed in that, and they are focused on driving that. We meet regularly with NYSERDA, and they want to know, when you're advertising for jobs, how many people you're going to hire. When you're hiring them, do you have a PLA in place? Like they go through a set of questions all the time, and they're very focused on that. Connecticut's been a bit more hands-off, and they've split things. So DEEP is, they're focused on the environmental concerns of siting, but Connecticut, because we're not siting in any Connecticut waters, they have no oversight there. So I think that's part of it. They're looking at price for clean energy. They're looking at, some concern around marine mammals, more, but in an interested way. They don't have a regulatory role exactly there, other than to make sure we have plans in place during the procurement. And then there's an economic development piece, which is with DECD, that they've handed off to DECD. And we're working with them to keep them, to make sure we're fulfilling the commitments we've made as part of our PPA. So it is different. New York and NYSERDA are very aggressive, and no other state is quite like they are, but they do have the biggest number, and they are the biggest market right now. Massachusetts there is a piece of legislation that's coming up next week for hearing that talks about removing the price cap and then putting a whole bunch of other requirements in around economic development and environmental justice and workforce that are probably more onerous than just hitting their price cap. So it may not have the effect they want of driving up more competition and building an industry in Massachusetts. I guess I should also, on Rhode Island's front, Rhode Island's geographic location and their easy access to the lease areas, they are prime for this. And so they're really actively building that industry. They seem a little less concerned with price and more about really establishing an industry. They have more job training up and going already, and they've done this once with Block Island. So I think they feel very comfortable in that space, which is why I think Connecticut and Rhode Island can be complementary to one another and really work together to procure more energy and benefit both of them from an economic development perspective. Anyone else?
Any other questions for Liz? If not, Liz, thank you so much for coming on today. Not surprised that you made a very clear and articulate deep dive into a policy matter. You're always very good at that. So it's good to have you, and we look forward to talking to you down the road. And next up is Roger Cronenberg, who is Vice President, Energy Strategy at Eversource. Is going to give an overview more generally. Thank you for being with us today, Roger.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. So I will try and get you back on schedule, which means I'll probably be going through these slides very rapidly. But what I thought I would do is give sort of an overall picture of what's going on in the energy space in New England, Eversource's role, and then tie in many of the things that we heard about solar, fuel cells, and offshore wind. I can go to the next slide. This is Eversource. We're in 3 states, electric, gas, and water utility. And I think most people sort of know this. If you can go to the next slide. We're fully involved in what I would call the energy transition, clean energy. We're quite proud of the things that we do, and it's nice to sort of get those accolades from external sources as well. And this is a little bit of some of the accolades we've gotten from some key folks, and feel good about it, to be honest. If you can go to the next slide. So this captures what's going on. If you look at New England, it's sort of one of the fundamental drivers of growth for utilities, population growth. It drives both residential consumption, commercial, as well as industries. Sort of the primary driver for industries is people, especially high-end industries. But what is going on in New England that becomes the primary driver for our future, both as New England as well as Eversource utility, is the objective to become carbon neutral by 2050. It's codified in different ways in different states, but ultimately, if you want to just really simplify it, where this region's heading to is to be carbon neutral by 2050. And that forms the overall challenge and opportunity, both for the region as well as our company. And I'll go through, piece by piece what we're doing in that transition. And it's a massive effort. If you think of the way energy is created, transported, converted today, a large part of that is petroleum and natural gas. And going from that current state to a state where net greenhouse gas emissions are 0 is a big turnover and changeover of the energy industry that impacts every aspect of our lives and economy. Next slide. So this is a little bit of a capture of what are the sources of carbon emissions for New England. So it zooms in a bit on New England. And what you'll see is industrial is not as significant in New England as it is for the rest of the United States. So we don't focus a lot on industrial, pure industrial demand and carbon emissions. But what is very important for this region is transportation. Other areas that are very important, residential, commercial, and then electric power goes into all of those sectors. The next slide. And where our power comes from today, half of it is gas. And if you're going to go to a future where essentially all of the economy is net zero in 2050, and in the interim, all of the power sector goes to net zero, you're doing a wholesale change out of how power is created today. We heard from Liz on offshore wind. Offshore wind is a very large resource for this industry, for the power industry. If you look historically throughout the power industry around the world, it's always focuses on resources available to that region. So, why is there a lot of coal plants in West Virginia? Because they have coal. Why is there a lot of gas plants in Texas? Because they have a lot of gas coming out of the Gulf. Our gas comes up the coast, mainly from Pennsylvania now. But in changing out this supply of electricity, one of the big resources we have in this region tends to be fossil energy short, and always has been through history. There's not a lot of oil and gas exploration and production and refining in this region. But the big resource we do have is wind, offshore wind. So this pie will change significantly, keeping as much of the nuclear as we can because it's built and it's zero carbon, adding a lot of offshore wind as the new resource, which will then offset much of the fossil resources there. One of the things we have to be cognizant of is right now we have a very diverse energy system, both in supply, conversion, transportation, all the way to the point of consumption, and for very good reason. If you sort of step way back, any system, any critical system in the world, your best tool for maintaining what I would call the availability of that system is diversity. There's a lot of talk about that in human systems today. We experienced that in the pandemic. And NASA focuses on that because of the criticality of what they're doing. So going from a very diverse system that gives you the characteristics of safety and health, the underpinning of our economic activity, we have to replace the system in the future with a system that gives us those same things. And that's a big challenge and a big opportunity for the region in going to that future, but maintaining and to some extent augmenting many of those societal needs and aspects around safety and health, the vibrancy of our economy, etc. Next slide. And that's where it comes into our grid. Many of the things we talked about, the grid, our network that we own, manage, operate, both on the transmission side and the distribution side, has to play and integrate all of those resources. So you've got offshore wind coming in, you've got fuel cells injecting in, you've got solar injecting in. We'll talk a little bit about EVs and some of the other new loads that are coming. And the orchestrator of all of that is the transmission distribution grid, and that's part of our business. And we owe that to both the region and society to do that better than anyone, both technically, but also in terms of customer service. Next slide. And this is talking about the transmission grid and what's going on there. So a big driver of changes in investment in the transmission grid will be these new supplies that we're bringing onto the system, both in terms of offshore wind, possibly more hydro coming down from Quebec. And then we've got solar occurring in pockets and various areas. You've got fuel cells, and you've got all this interaction. At the same time, you're going to be retiring or using less the fossil plants. So that changes all the flows in the transmission system, and hence the investments have to adjust in this reconfiguration of the transmission system. And that's part of what we do for the region in all 3 states. Next slide. Offshore wind. I don't think I need to say much about this. Liz covered this very, very well. It's a big resource for the region, for the entire Northeast. It's an industry that has to be built from scratch, as Liz pointed out. Next slide. Energy storage. A big part of the future is in balancing all of these resources that are coming on that have different capabilities and different characteristics. As Liz mentioned, offshore wind's blowing well in the winter. Solar works well in the summer. So you've got these diversity of resources, and part of balancing all of that is storage, be it shorter term storage or longer term storage, how that plays into the grid. And part of that storage will be turbine plants. We would certainly want over time those turbine plants to work off of low to zero carbon fuel, but conversion of a fuel, a chemical fuel or a molecule to electricity is the way we balance all these forces today. And I see that as part of the future. And then you've got shorter term storage that can play multiple roles. I would highlight the storage facility we're building right now in Provincetown. It's world leading for the industry. There's nothing else in the world that I've found of that magnitude and functionality. It's 38 megawatt hours, and it backs up the entire town of Provincetown in case of an outage of the line that feeds that area. It's actually more than Provincetown. It's down through the Upper Cape. Very, very interesting, very complex, because there's a lot of switching that has to happen on the system to allow that storage to then power that entire area. And we're also leveraging this to do resiliency projects. And when I went back to what we really value as a society is a diverse energy system that gives us very high availability. And storage is one of those where you can island the storage and you can give very high availability. Fuel cells could be part of that microgrid. It's used a lot in data centers. Fuel cells are used a lot in data centers because when you combine the fuel cell with the electricity, you get very, very high availability, which is very important for that industry. Solar comes in here. We're looking in Massachusetts out of some legislation that we have where you can combine solar with storage and other resources to boost the resiliency of a particular area. And the operations around that are very much utility operations. It's a lot of distribution grid switching. You also have to have the operating and maintenance personnel. If there's a big storm, and we're seeing storms at different times of the year and different intensities, you have to have access to essentially a labor reinsurance, which is mutual aid. We can call in folks literally from all over North America. And that's kind of our role and the value that we bring to society in making energy highly available for both businesses as well as consumers. Next slide. Solar energy, we talked about that. Part of this resiliency to give us the high availability we need for our energy. You're asking, as we'll talk about a little bit later, we're asking society to depend more and more on electricity. And what we also have to deliver with that is a very high availability of that electricity. So you can combine solar with batteries, possibly a fuel cell, maybe even backup rotating generation, and to get that diversity of supply, transportation, conversion to give you the very high availability that you need for society, both businesses as well as consumers. Next slide. EV charging. If you go back to this big transition, and if you recall the chart that I showed where greenhouse gases comes from, much of transportation will be moving towards electricity, and there's a combination of drivers, very much policy pushing it, very much technology that's developed to the point where it's, they're great products. I think society is coming to the realization that electric cars are just great products, and they're not just great products for an environmental reason or personal identity reasons. They're just more convenient. If your car's charging at home, you just jump in, you drive it. You don't go for services often. Electric systems tend to be much more robust. I saw this personally in industrial systems when they went from essentially engine drivers to electric motors. There was a realization that they're just lower maintenance systems and had a lot more functionalities that weren't the primary driver when that they were being done. So you're seeing the same thing going on with electric vehicles. Manufacturers are now touting the towing capacity because you can get very high torques at standstill that you can never get with an engine. You're touting off-road capabilities because you get very high precise control. Special forces are looking at it because they're very quiet. So you can get a lot of different characteristics out of this, and the society is realizing it's just a much better product for transportation, and it's transitioning very well at the light duty end, moving up to the medium duty, light duty trucks, and it'll be coming to businesses and fleets. And when the products develop, and they're developing fairly rapidly to the point where it makes sense for businesses, our expectation is that transition will actually happen much faster than the consumer products have, because it's economic driven. And once the economics make sense, it'll transition very rapidly. At the very high end, tying back to what the gentleman from Fuel Cell Energy was saying, at the very high end, personally, I don't see an electric 18-wheeler. I can go into why, but that's a market where I see some type of molecule as being the primary fuel. It'll be diesel. It's diesel right now. It could stay diesel. I mean, I can't really call that one. It could stay diesel. I don't see going as electric batteries. It could be hydrogen. So that's a bit uncertain. And you'll see those molecules dominating from the high end down. You'll see electricity dominating from the bottom end up. Exactly where the crossover is, I couldn't tell you. There'll be a crossover. My best guess is it'll be at the higher end. But in decarbonizing the system, what you'll see is to maintain that energy availability, you need that diversity of supply, conversion, transportation. So I very much see the future as being electrons and molecules, be it gas molecules or liquid molecules. And Europe's very much there. For all the ways we use energy today, including heating, which is very, very critical for safety and health in New England. Next slide. Energy efficiency. In Japan demonstrates this the best. When you're energy limited, energy source limited, fossil fuel in this case today, one of your best resources is energy efficiency. You just make better use of your energy. Folks that are on the forefront of this is Japan, because Japan is an island and it has very little resources, period, including energy. So one of their top resources is energy efficiency. We do a lot in this space. We'll continue to do a lot in this space. A lot of it's been around electricity, energy efficiency. A lot more will be around space heating and cooling, energy efficiency. But this is a very, very key resource for the region. And policies also recognizes that and is very supportive of driving deeper and deeper energy efficiency. It can be a little bit challenging when you're talking about an older region like New England, but it's one of your top resources. You see, energy efficiency coming in with EVs right now. Conversion efficiency of transportation is about 20% of the energy coming in from petroleum gets converted into useful transportation use. With electricity, it's probably more in the 90s. So just in that, you could see a big boost in sort of how we use the energy that that we are able to create from diverse sources. Next slide. And then this is talking to our personal commitment as a company. We've made a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030. And what does it mean for this audience? We're a significant company in New England. We are based in New England. So I said it's a little bit of the Walmart effect. To get to carbon neutral by 2030, first of all, it's a real challenge, and it's really pushing us. So the main things that to get to carbon neutral by 2030 is driving down greenhouse gas emissions due to line losses in our electrical system. That will go down over time. But more relevant to this audience, our facilities, we're going to have to drive those down both through energy efficiency, how we heat and cool them. We'll have to do the same thing with our fleets. How do we make those carbon neutral over time? And the beauty of that for this audience is, being a New England company that's upscale, it gives a little bit of the Walmart effect. Once we figure those things out, and we figured them out not just for California, we figured them out for the New England climate and environment, those solutions become broadly available to the entire society. So if you're a small company, and you saw this, what I call the Walmart effect, if you're a smaller company, you don't have the resources to study this, figure this all out. You can literally go to the vendors and say, just do whatever Eversource did, and we'll just go with that. Both in terms of fleets, both in terms of our facilities, less so in things that are specific to the industry, but the fleets and the facilities, that'll be made available broadly to the New England society. And again, it will be New England specific. It won't be a solution that works great in California. Next slide. And this gets into the specifics that I talked about. Next slide. And that's it. I think I came close. I didn't quite get us back on track, but I came close.
Roger, thanks so much for that overview. We really appreciate your expertise. Always great to get put things in context by looking at what's going on regionally, since this is a regional market that we play in. And thank you for your time today. Appreciate that.
Yeah, one of the other things, John, is in this transition and transformation, I very much see New England as having a natural advantage in developing, commercializing the solutions for energy transition and transformation. And if the region plays its cards well, there's no other region in the world that has all of the educational, manufacturing experience and expertise combined that's necessary in the solutions. So a little bit of investment there would really go a long way. And Liz touched on some of it for offshore wind, but it's across the space.
Well, that's great to hear that we're in that marketplace. Hopefully we can continue to be leaders. We show everybody else how it's done. We'll move on now to our government affairs, our community updates. I believe Ashley and I are the first ones to go. Ashley, do you have an update for the group?
Good morning, everyone. So we are done with legislative session, so there's not a whole lot to update in terms of that front. The Release Space Working Group had their full group meeting on Tuesday, and their next one will be August 10th. In the previous one, I know many of you are on that working group, but it was subcommittee 1 and 2 that had a Q&A from other members of the working group as well as the public. And then on August 10th, it will be subcommittees 3, 4, and 5. They also plan to talk about the ad hoc teams and topical discussions and create and change drafting team. So stay up to date. And if anybody who is on that working group has anything they would like to quickly add, please feel free to jump in now.
All right, if there's no questions for Ashley on my side of the government relations update, I really don't have very much. Continuing to kind of monitor what came out of session, some of the bills and how they may affect certain industries that we represent. And but other than that, I don't have too much. We'll be paying attention to in the off session here to some dockets at deep, but other than that, I don't have too much. And I hope, I guess, that we can move on to Lee Hoffman. If you'd like to give the Energy Committee update, that'd be great.
frankly, John, I think we've had an hour of energy, and I had told Marcy that I was going to yield the floor to other people who actually know what they're doing. So I think we've gotten a fairly robust energy update for today.
Okay, thank you, Lee. We can then move on to the Waste Quality Committee. Mark Bobbin, are you on? And Harold, is Harold there?
I know Harold couldn't make it today, but I don't see Mark.
All right, well, why don't we then just move on? It's okay. We'll move to the Air Quality Committee. Is Steve Eidelman on? Or David Krotchko?
Hi, everyone. Not a lot to update on. It's been pretty quiet from the air side of things, but just a couple quick reminders that there's been recently some poor air quality forecasts. So folks that have emergency generators, just keep an eye out for that. There's been a couple instances so far this year with Deep's automated email alerts. So they haven't always been going out to the their full list. So there's been a couple instances where the forecast hasn't made it to people that are subscribed to the alert. So if you don't receive the email, just be sure to check the website, or there's an automated phone number that you can call, particularly on Fridays when they issue the forecast for Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, all on Friday. So if you don't receive the email, just be sure you're checking for what that forecast is, because there's been some issues with the email list. And then just another thing for folks that do stack tests, it seems like the deep stack testing group is fully back out in the field for witnessing tests. There's only during COVID, I think either they weren't coming or maybe only one of their field staff was going out, but now it seems like they're out there and they're going to be on site for anyone doing stack tests going forward, at least for now.
Thank you, Steve. Any other updates or no? That's it?
Yeah, that's all we had, I think.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And for the Water Quality Committee, is Debbie or Wojcik on at all that would like to give an update?
Good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me. This is Wojtek.
Wojtek, good to see you, or good to hear from you too.
All right. I'm not sure. I think Debbie's on.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, so I guess a couple of updates on the EPA side of the house. So we are still seeing some updates regarding PFAS. There was the first PFAS removal plant that was put online recently in Orange County, California. So that's just a sign of the times, I guess. Probably more of those to come. And some updates on the WOTUS, or the navigable waters. There's going to be some public outreach and stakeholder engagement activities coming. So that was announced early June, and basically just says forthcoming. So stay tuned on that. The MSGP for EPA, which is our equivalent industrial stormwater general permit, is in effect. And I know there's a bunch of facilities, so Massachusetts and New Hampshire, that are actively engaging in the NOIs for those. The drinking water chemical supply chain, as I'm sure some of you are experiencing due to COVID related stoppages, there's been some, I guess, recognition of that on the drinking water supply side. So having some issues getting some bleach, sodium hypochlorite, and other, chlorine products that are used for disinfection at these facilities. So EPA is working on providing resources to more readily obtain those chemicals. And lastly, on the EPA side, just wanted to alert you to a Clean Water Act settlement from a Connecticut company that caused a fish kill in a brook that discharges to the Still River. So enforcement is, I'd say, picking up on the EPA and DEEP side. And Wojtek, you want to handle some of the DEEP updates?
Yes, I can. So I was just checking the latest posts on the DEP's general permits and fact sheets website, and it's safe to say that the industrial stormwater general permit has been reissued indeed and is posted with the new fact sheet there for everybody. So it will become effective October 1st of this year, and it will expire September 30th, 2024. Other than that, there really isn't much. I think we spoke about the fact that DEP will be requiring more insight into PFAS for some of the facilities, especially when you're newly applying for permits. So I would just watch that space, be aware of it, and ask questions, ahead of time, so you know what you're getting into and what you have to do if you do have to, declare whether you have those and do any testing certifications. Other than that, there really isn't much else.
Just a call out, the permitting and licensing page from DEEP has recently changed. I think this is part of the concierge service. So if you haven't gone in there and poked around, I suggest you do. I think it's a lot of the same information. It's just been differently organized. So there also is a survey through the concierge service that is due Monday. So if you haven't taken that yet, and it should be on a link in your emails if you signed up for those.
Great. Does anybody else have any updates that they'd like to give or any input? If not, Marcy, do we have any other updates or anything you need to get from the group or announce? And if not, I just want to thank Marcy as usual. She does a tremendous effort on behalf of Ashley and I and CBIA and the group on an ongoing basis. Her effort and commitment to E2 is amazing, and I really enjoy working with her. It makes it easy for all of us. So I do want to thank you, Marcy, for your effort this year. I know we get a little bit of a break, I think, next month, and just wanted to thank you for a really tremendous effort in helping Ashley and I in our first year kind of take on this council. So appreciate you. So if you got anything else, if not, we could end the meeting now if you'd like.
Yep, just a reminder, no meeting in August, but I will be sending out a calendar invite for the September meeting. That's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a good August. We'll see you back in September. In the meantime, if you have any questions for us, certainly reach out to any one of us here at CBIA. We'd be happy to help. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.